Note that neither the director of the CIA nor the deputy director had, in his career, shown any reluctance to shed American or foreign blood in covert military operations. The book details how some of the biggest names in American defense and intelligence were involved in an operation that promoted the dope trade, tax evasion, and gun running. Michael Springman is a Washington lawyer. He worked for the U.S. State Department's Foreign Service for 20 years. He spent 2 years as chief of the visa section at the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He says superiors repeatedly ordered him to issue visas to unqualified applicants. It was illegal. He protested. He's just written this article in the reputable Covert Action Quarterly of Washington, D.C., and was interviewed by the CBC radio program Dispatches. I had not been protesting fraud. What I was protesting was, in reality, an effort to bring recruits rounded up by the agency and Osama bin Laden to the U.S. for terrorist training by the CIA. He details numerous cases. The State Department did not run the consulate in Jeddah. The CIA did. Of the roughly 20 Washington Dispatch staff there, I know for a certainty that only 3 people, including myself, had no ties, either professional or familial, to any of the U.S. intelligence services. Now, what bugs me to no end is that mainstream media journalists function as if these books, written by the most professional in their own ranks, they function as if these books don't exist. Fellow journalists, the dots exist. For goodness sakes, connect them while you can. There are plenty of what we call in the news business pigs, solid current evidence, new dots. But these dots, past and present, are never connected. Take this November 22nd front page story in the Globe and Mail. I almost missed the startling information in this myself because the headline indulges a stereotypical Canadian self-put-down. Us stupid Canadians, we let a terrorist, one Ali Mohammed, get away. The real story is buried. Mr. Mohammed was a U.S. Army sergeant but trained bin Laden's bodyguards. What? Ali Mohammed was in the Americans' good books. Ali Mohammed wasn't so shadowy in those days. He was one of their guys. The headline on this story might have read, USA protected top al-Qaeda operative, and it might well have been the banner. Author Nafiz Ahmed's own conclusion is that the documentation strongly suggests the United States, or more precisely, significant elements of the U.S. government, military, and intelligence, had extensive foreknowledge of the 11th September attacks and were in various ways complicit in those attacks. All this and more must be considered when asking what really happened on September 11th. And where is bin Laden, you ask? Have journalists stopped asking? Why? Journalist and former Los Angeles Police Department detective Michael Rupert quipped recently, one guess is that he's in Switzerland having his nails done. Next week, George W. Bush and the oligarchy. Even among those who believe that the war on Afghanistan was part of the so-called war on terrorism, there's a fairly wide recognition that the outcome, the occupation of Afghanistan, might have something to do with the ambitions of U.S. oil corporations. Which brings us to the connection between September 11th and the oligarchy. Let me start with a crash course in globe oil reality, a framework little mentioned by the mainstream media. First, the size and power of big oil. Together, oil and coal constitute the biggest single industry in history, writes Ross Gelbspan in his book, The Heat is On. Big oil alone does well over $1 trillion a year in business. Second, we're at the end of the petroleum era. Total world oil extraction is peaking. These charts from Scientific American and other equally reliable sources tell the story. And the supply does not drop off gently. If you think this industry is rich and powerful now, wait till the supply is clearly on the wane. At the website www.dioff.com, you can learn that in 1995, Petro Consultants published a report for oil industry insiders at $32,000 a pop, titled World Oil Supply 1930 to 2050, which concludes that world oil extraction could peak as soon as the year 2000 and decline to half that level by 2025. Large and permanent increases in oil prices were predicted after the year 2000. Black gold is going to go platinum. Well, wait. We'll just switch to other energy sources, right? Wind, solar, biomass, tidal? Wrong. All the alternatives in the world, writes former U.S. Army officer and political analyst Stan Goff, cannot begin to provide more than a tiny fraction of the energy base now provided by oil. This makes it more than a resource, and the drive to control what's left more than an economic competition. Most experts agree, writes Larry Chin in Online Journal, that the Caspian Basin and Central Asia are the keys to energy in the 21st century. Energy expert James Dorian in the Oil and Gas Journal, those who control the oil routes out of Central Asia will impact all future direction and quantities of flow and the distribution of revenues from new extraction. In other words, a pipeline through, of all places, Afghanistan, needed to carry an estimated $5 trillion worth of Caspian oil and gas reserves to markets. A significant detail that surely is not lost on those in power in the United States. So just who are these people? Let's start with the occupant of the Oval Office himself. George W. Bush was CEO of Harken Energy. George Herbert Walker Bush, his dad and the former president, was an oil man. Now he's on the board of the Carlyle Group, which is heavily invested in oil and armaments. Dick Cheney was Secretary of Defense during Desert Storm. He stepped down to become CEO of Halliburton Oil, cashed in $34 million in Halliburton stock options before taking office as vice president. Donald Evans, Bush's Commerce Secretary, was with Colorado Oil. Zalmay Khalilzad is the Bush-appointed special envoy to Afghanistan. Khalilzad previously was an aide to the American oil company Unocal. He drew up Unocal's risk analysis on its proposed trans-Afghan gas pipeline. Khalilzad reports to Condoleezza Rice, Bush's national security advisor. When she was a board director of Chevron Corporation, she served as its principal expert on Kazakhstan, where Chevron holds the largest concession of any of the international